Well, hello everyone. For those that do not know me, my name is Francisco Simões. I'm the chair of the RuNeY Youth Network, and we're here for the first webinar of the CONFAB Webinar series of the RuNeY Youth Network, which will take place from now, May, to the end of 2022. So this is a series of monthly webinars. And before we move on for our first invited guest for this number of webinars that we have for the rest of the year, I will just share with you some information about our action. So RuNeY Youth Network is focusing on rural youth as a cost action. We gather people, more than 100 participants from 33 different countries. And we are mostly focused on three main goals. The first one is to establish one network, a diverse network representing different countries and multi-stakeholders around the topic of rural NEET youth social inclusion. As a network, we want to foster knowledge, skills, and best practice exchange in order to promote developments in terms of research and policies for improving social inclusion of rural needs. And of course, as our main target, we expect to create an observatory which will focus on rural youth in the future, expectedly from 2023. Uh, we are organized in 4 working groups, one focusing on social networks and social inclusion for rural needs, a second one on rural formal and non-formal education, a third one on employment services in rural areas, and finally a fourth one which discusses and focuses on rural needs and sustainability. So these are the 4 key topics of our action. As part of our work, we have developed a considerable number of outputs and events. I will just highlight a couple of them. We have developed some national reports about the situation of rural needs across several countries. We have also prepared manuals which we hope are useful to analyze interventions for rural needs across the continent. We also had a conference on rural education and the prospects for rural young people in Europe. And for the past year, we have also prepared a number of special issues on aspects such as youth and mobility, policies, or also some policy briefs on topics related to education and mobility. So all of these are available on our website. You can visit the website from the RuNeY Youth Network and have free access to all of our deliverables. And finally, coming soon in September, we will organize a conference on the topic of rural youth and the new youth guarantee. So you can submit your own abstract if you're interested in participating, and we hope to see you in Brescia on the 14th of September. So these are some of the key elements of our action and some of our key deliverables. And today, to start or to kick off our webinar series, we have with us Eszter Sandor from the Eurofound. She will share some data and some ideas around their own study on the impact of COVID-19 on youth. But before we move on, I will just shortly present Eszter. She's a research manager in the social policies unit at the Eurofound. She has a background in economics and expertise in survey methodology and statistical analysis. She has worked on the preparation and management of the European Quality of Life Survey on the impact of the COVID-19 on youth. So, Eszter, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, for joining the RuNeY Youth Network. And the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Hope you can see my screen already.
Yes.
And thank you for this invitation. Eurofound has a long-term history in researching youth and needs. And this research had a lot of challenges when the COVID-19 crisis started. And I'm going to show you the results of an online survey that we started in early 2020, trying to gather some data at a time when there was no data available anywhere. We have been calling the COVID-19 crisis for youth as a three-headed dog, because it first began as a health crisis, but very quickly, especially for young people, for reasons that I will show you, it became an economic crisis as well, and a social crisis. And we know that COVID-19 was most dangerous for older people, but it was mostly young people that were affected by the economic and social consequences. And we try to look at how young people, which we define between age 18 and 29, in line with Eurostat now, how they have been affected by the COVID-19 crisis. We were looking at their employment, economic situation, social exclusion, and mental well-being, and many other aspects. A few words about the survey before I start. So the first round, which was basically a test round, whether we can see whether we can do an online survey easily, was in 2020 spring, so in April. And it was quite surprising that we reached 68,000 respondents in the EU. It could be because lots of people were at home at the time and wanted to fill in surveys, or lots of people had things to say about COVID-19 in general. But this success really made us think that we should continue at least as long as the COVID-19 pandemic is lasting. So we recruited respondents through social media and through our own channels. We repeated the survey in the summer when the lockdowns were kind of over in a lot of countries and we had a lot fewer respondents. But then in spring 2021, when we had another survey round, again, we gained another 47,000 respondents. And while we were running this survey, we were collecting emails from the respondents, and a lot of them participated in this panel, and we were following the same respondents over time. And in last autumn, we had a special survey round for just our panel respondents. And as you can see, we had 19,500 panel respondents at that time. And we just now closed the 5th round of the survey with 39,000 respondents, just the 2nd of May. And yesterday was the first time that we had a chance to look at the new data set. So in terms of young people, the pandemic, as I mentioned, had an impact on different sides of their lives. First of all, it was the employment that was affected, but at the same time, education moved online, and a lot of people experienced job losses and learning loss. And for young people particularly, this meant that they were unable to build their social capital. So basically, the whole of their life got delayed. And this has affected their mental health apart from their general health. First, I would like to talk about employment, which is probably the most interesting for you. So in terms of a historical overview, we know that the crisis in 2008, so the employment effects of the crisis were the worst for young people in 2013. And as you can see, the unemployment rate was as high as nearly 20% for people aged 15 to 29 at that time. And since then, there was a continuous decrease in the unemployment rate for young people. And finally, it reached pre-crisis levels by 2019. And this is what the COVID-19 pandemic has stopped, and it has immediately increased. And the reason why it was mostly young people that were affected by job losses was that the decrease in the job, the activity, was especially in those sectors that were overrepresented by young people. So as you can see in the 2019 table on the right side, young people are overrepresented in retail jobs, in accommodation, food service jobs, recreation, entertainment sector as well, but as well as health and social work. And many of these were immediately affected by decrease in activity, as shown at the time by the job vacancy rate, which has a direct relationship with activity and unemployment later. And another reason is, of course, the lower job security. Young people are much more likely to have temporary contracts, work in low-paid jobs and part-time. And I know this chart can be a little bit complicated. So in our panel data, we were following the same young people over time in 3 rounds of the survey. And among those who were employed before COVID, we watched the decrease in the employment rate, and we measured around 12% job loss in our own sample. And at the same time, among students, another 12% transitioned to unemployment because they were unable to find a job after they graduated. So the highest job loss was once again in Greece, just like before in the financial crisis. But students transitioning to unemployment was highest here in Ireland. In Ireland, it had one of the worst lockdowns in Europe. So this could be one of the explanations why. Looking at a little bit rural and urban differences, you can see that it was particularly rural areas where young people were more likely to lose their jobs. It could have something to do with the employability of jobs, and in current survey round we are also asking about about the teleworkability of jobs. We are now asking people whether their job is teleworkable, but in this survey round we don't have this data. But as you can see, the difference between young people and older people has increased as the pandemic progressed in terms of job loss. And in spring 2021, we measured that as many as 20% of young people in our survey had lost their job. And at the same time, when asking about job security, like how likely you are to lose your job, again, it was young people who are working in rural areas were much more likely to say, 18% said that they are very likely or likely to lose their job in the next 3 months. And also in terms of, so for people above the age of 30, also rural areas were more affected by job insecurity and job loss. But it can be seen as a positive that the increase in unemployment during the pandemic seems to have been relatively short term. So when you look at monthly data from Eurostat, you can see that it looks like a short-term shock between March 2020 and approximately by October 2021, the youth unemployment rate is back more or less on track. So even though, so despite this positive finding, these 2 years of gap in social capital, and later on I will show something about education as well, does mean that a lot of young people had pushed out a lot of things, jobs, education, buying a house. So other aspects that are other than employment are not so easy to correct as employment. So in terms of teleworking, it's also something I want to mention. So we know that pandemic introduced working from home into the mainstream. And before the pandemic, it was always a constant 5% of people, of workers who were working from home. But in 2020, this increased to 12%. But young people were less likely to work from home even in 2020. So in Eurostat data, it was only 9% of those under 30 who were working from home usually. But we also asked about the preferences of working from home. And you can see that young people are much more likely to say that they would like to work in at least several times a week from home, but most respondents want to work in a hybrid way, so partially from home and partially from the workplace. And even though there was this preference, it was young people who were first going back to the workplace. By autumn 2021, we found that 64% of 18 to 29-year-olds had completely returned to the office or the other place of work. And in the very, very fresh data, we see that this has increased to over 70% by now. And we will have more data on this shortly, hopefully. It's also just like with the job losses, we see that people in rural areas were less likely to work from home during the pandemic. Again, this could have something to do with the teleworkability of the types of jobs that people are working in. And again, preliminary data from the current survey round shows that many of people in all of these groups have returned to the workplace. So not just in rural areas, but also in urban, at all age groups. Working from home has decreased by approximately 10 percentage points. Now a few words about education. So we know that the pandemic caused a huge disruption to education, and this resulted in a lot of uncertainty about the future, whether people will be able to graduate, whether they will be able to find a job after leaving school, and in learning loss. And part of the inequality behind this learning loss was a digital divide. In many countries, people were struggling to keep up with online schooling because they didn't have access to equipment, or the parents didn't have the necessary digital skills. And again, as I mentioned, this impacted the human capital accumulation. And it had an impact not just on the students, but also on young parents who were at home, and the children's schools were closed. And this chart is showing just the duration of school closures. And again, I have personal experience from Ireland, where we are, that the schools were closed for a very long time, for 28 weeks overall. In our survey, we asked young students of their experience of their online education during the pandemic. And even though nearly 80% said that they did have sufficient equipment to carry out this education, less than half, 42%, said that they would like more online education when the pandemic is over. So this is actually asking tertiary level students. And yeah, it's interesting. You would think that that students enjoy the online aspect of education, but actually they preferred teaching in person. And the quality of online education was only 40% said that they were satisfied with it, and it was a positive experience for only 38%. At the moment, we don't know the reasons why, so whether it's always technical difficulties, whether they needed more support, but in general, it's not very encouraging for future online learning. And when asking young parents, here I extended it to 34-year-olds just so that we have more of a sample size, experience of their children's online schooling, this was much more negative. So 68% said that they had sufficient equipment, but they did not, so more than half said they did not have enough information about their children's education, and as little as 17% said that they would like more online schooling when the pandemic is over. And it was particularly parents that had the negative experience of this education, because only 12% said that this was positive. Here again, we can look at differences between rural areas and urban areas. And just the only difference, so the numbers are slightly different because this is, this is, sorry, normal differences, sorry. Yeah, so as you can see in rural areas, it was less likely, parents were less likely to say that they had sufficient equipment. It was only 67%, and except for the experience of their children, all of the metrics are lower for rural areas. Oh yeah, okay, and I realized that this is the part where I didn't select only young people just for the sample size. This is all parents. And so mental well-being of young people was seen as a parallel epidemic. So alongside COVID-19, mental health care services really suffered because they reported across Europe that they were not able to reach those young people who were most in need. They could not provide their services online, even though they tried to set up various phone lines and online consultation, but this was very difficult. And there are many theories behind why the disco depression really increased among young adults. And initially it was related to fears from COVID, but also especially about the uncertainty of their futures, but also then the financial hardship. Many of the young people had to move back with their families after being independent. This we also found to be a factor. But at the same time, we did look at differences between young people who were living with their parents and those who did not. And for unemployed young people, for NEET young people who were unemployed and also not studying, if they did live with their parents, that did have an impact, a positive impact on their mental health, but still a negative impact on their social exclusion. We directly related the mental health problems to the strictness of the lockdowns. So the more strict the lockdowns in a country, the worst impact on the mental health. And it's assumed that it will be a longer lasting problem than the employment issues. This is showing some data compared to before the pandemic, which was in the European Quality of Life Survey. We measured this with a face-to-face method, so it's very different from an online method. This is why I put a line. You can't directly compare these results. Just wanted to illustrate how usually young people were less likely to experience negative feelings, so such as feeling depressed or lonely or anxious than those over 30, but this has completely switched during the pandemic. And the worst mental health was measured during the spring 2021. And this was also the largest difference between young people and older people. Where this was the third lockdown generally in all of the countries. And it did not yet really improve by the autumn. And I just looked at the data yesterday. I expected for mental health to have improved a little bit more, but it did not. So it actually continues to be around 30% of people feeling negative feelings very regularly over the last 2 weeks. The WHO's 5 score, which shows helps us to measure the risk of depression, is also quite low for young people. And this could be related now to the current crisis of the war and other economic issues, inflation. So we're going to examine this further. Looking at urban-rural differences, just because due to the previous data that I showed you, it's not surprising that tension or anxiety, loneliness, and also feeling depressed was also more common among young people in rural areas. But it's interesting to see how there's no such big difference for people above 30. So it's not just in general that rural areas in Europe, people are more likely to feel lonely, for example. It's very similar percentages during the pandemic for those above 30, but it is young people who were much more likely to feel this. And this is just illustrative, so a result of a regression that when looking into what factor had the highest impact on the fall in mental well-being for young people, it was school closures. So workplace closures actually had, once controlling for other factors, a positive impact, but school closures through whether it is through parents or through students, had a direct negative relationship with mental well-being. And okay, so just a few conclusions. We found that the economic and social consequences of the pandemic were stronger for young people than for other groups in general. And the policy response both in the EU and in the countries did help with the economic recovery. But the problem is that for over the long term, you have to still pay attention to see whether those two years of interruption, what it meant for young people, and whether everybody got back on track, or who are the ones who were left behind during these 2 years. And the acceleration of this digital shift and moving online was very difficult for education institutions, for youth service providers, and for mental health service providers. And this was particularly an issue in rural areas. We collected a lot of data from service providers, from our national correspondents, and all of them said the same thing, that it was those who most needed the help that were not reached. And even though telework preferences are stronger among youth, the majority of them have now returned to the workplace. And people in rural areas were both less likely to be able to work from home, and also they were more likely to return to the workplace by now. And mental health services and professionals said that the impact was very severe of restrictive measures. There was a lot of urgent need, and it was very difficult to adapt for them. And the most vulnerable people in rural areas were the most hard to reach. And youth mental well-being was the worst among rural youth during these 2 years. And as of yet, it has not yet returned, not only to pre-war pandemic levels, but not even to the levels measured in the summer 2020 when the first lockdowns were eased. And there are a lot of concerns about the impact of uncertainty. And this is why we're also continuing to monitor young people, and we're planning another series of surveys. And in 2023, we're planning a dedicated survey on young people and young people's issues specifically. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eszter. I think you covered a very considerable number of topics that are relevant for us. So I imagine that we will certainly reach to some comments and questions regarding your presentation. And we actually already have some questions here at our chat. So probably we could start with Liena's question, which was actually the same I had about remote work. So Liena is asking if you have any explanation for the fact that working remotely was lower in rural areas. Does it have anything to do with the kind of industries and services provided in rural areas? A lower number of IT companies that work from more peripheral and rural areas. What do you do? What do you think about this result in particular?
Yeah, so to share a little bit about the methodology, this survey was a relatively long survey online, and it's quite difficult to ask about the specific industry online when it is the respondent is filling in the questionnaire themselves. It's quite difficult for them to allocate themselves in the right detailed NACE category. And because of this, we were only asking about a very general higher level, like, for example, how many people work in agriculture, industry, and the type of services. But for example, education services or health services were all grouped into one. Financial services was one. We tried to work a little bit with this data, but we didn't see the results that we really wanted to see, apart from the very obvious. So for example, wholesale and retail, accommodation, food service, which we know already that it's very difficult to work from home in those sectors. And this is why we introduced a new question, which I don't have, unfortunately, data for yet, but shortly I will, is the perceived teleworkability, whether the person who answers thinks that their job is teleworkable. And once we can control for this, we will be able to see in a few months' time when we assess this data, the difference between how much it matters. But yeah, we do know that the digital, so the access to digital services and also the digital skills and equipment is usually, not in all countries, but in many countries is worse in rural areas, especially. And this is all EU level data that I showed you. There's no time for country level, but we know that this is especially true in Eastern Europe, whereas there are some countries where rural areas are quite well connected, and in some cases even better. Rural areas, for example, yeah, you don't stereotypically a little bit have higher income in countries like Luxembourg and other some other Western countries, but in Eastern Europe, this is not the case. And yeah, but we do know that those people who are able to telework are usually in more higher income jobs. IT sector is a very good example, but there are others as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Eszter. I was wondering also if you had the opportunity to make any comparisons between, for instance, East and West and Northern and Southern countries. And I'm asking this because rural needs rates are higher in eastern and southern countries. So we're particularly interested on those countries. So could you see in general any kind of east-west, north-south divide in your data? Did the Eurofund look at the data from that perspective?
Yes, we did in general, but not so much,
Uh-huh.
particularly for young people, just because we were a little bit more careful about sample sizes. But yeah, we did. So, for example, let me see. I have this data here about
Share it. You're more than welcome. No problem. And
about
if you can share it, of course.
yeah. This is about online education, just to kind of
An example.
illustrate you.
Yeah.
So, for example, in several Eastern and Southern European countries, so examples are Slovakia, for example, only 70% of people said that they are satisfied with online education. This is probably related to the equipment available, because they had one of the lowest across Europe. Yeah, similar example in Croatia, Bulgaria, I think Latvia had the lowest number of respondents that they had enough equipment to study from home. Yeah, Baltic countries in general, whereas if you compare it with countries like Austria, Belgium, Luxembourg, nearly 100% of people said they had no problem with online education. I mean, they still didn't like it, but they had sufficient equipment, and this did matter for their satisfaction. They were still not very satisfied, so nobody liked this. For example, they had about 50-something% said, yes, I didn't mind this, but yeah, it's higher than Eastern European countries for sure.
So at least there's certainly a difference in terms of the access to digital infrastructure and equipment when you compare between countries and between big areas of the continent, I imagine.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of granular data, but the thing is that because of sample sizes, particularly for young people, I was very careful to interpret the country level data too closely. And I was looking at more general, so I didn't separate rural and urban areas yet. It's a bit better when you do a proper regression, but in this very general percentages, I try to be careful when interpreting.
Any more questions out there from the people participating? Anyone? I still have one question, but I would like to give the floor or the screen to other people. Well, while people might be thinking about other questions, Eszter, how is this survey going to move from here? So we were just discussing before we started that you will keep going on with the survey. What are the expectations regarding this work?
Yeah, so our original plan was to close this survey this spring, because a lot of things changed. Lockdowns are over and people are back to work, but then we did find it to be a very useful tool to reach a lot of people. And while we're waiting for our regular surveys, which are face-to-face, so we have the European Working Conditions Survey running next year or in 2 years' time, and then the European Quality of Life Survey 2 years after that. While we're waiting for that, why not run a few of these online surveys? And we planned a specific one on youth for 2023. So it's going to be likely in the spring 2023. We have not yet developed the questionnaire. So if anybody has any suggestions for interesting topics for young people that might be missing from current data sets, that would be interesting. We will likely make the survey available for all age groups, but we will try to focus on youth issues, and also to bring down the age group to 16 and over rather than 18 and over. Because of data protection reasons, we were careful this time around, and we only asked the survey from 18-year-olds and over, but now we try to do it a bit lower. And apart from this, which is a bit separate topic, we might be running another survey in the autumn, but this might be more related to the current, the war in Ukraine, and not specifically on that, but its impacts, inflation, energy poverty. But this is still just in the plans. It's not official yet.
Yeah. I see Bianca wants to come in. Bianca, please do come in.
I have a question. Did you use the panel dimension of your data? Because you said you had the panel.
Yes, so in the youth report, we did use it quite extensively. So especially when tracking the employment levels and when running regressions on mental health, life satisfaction, and trust. I didn't show any of the trust data now because that would be yet another topic to talk about. But this regression that I showed you earlier, we tried to find a direct relationship between COVID-related lockdowns and mental health, and we did show for young people in particular a relationship when controlling for other factors, and this we use the panel data for that. Sorry, I think you're muted.
You're muted, yes.
And you use the panel data for employment as well?
Say it again?
For employment.
For employment, yes. So we were tracking the same young people over time, and we tried to see how many of them lost their jobs. So when I said we found 12% of our young people losing their jobs, that was our panel members. So those are the same people over time. And we try to track how many of them went back into jobs, and many of them not yet really did by autumn 2021. And we still have this panel continuing now. So I haven't yet been able to analyze it from this spring. So that is it just finished 2 weeks ago. But yeah, we still have those same people in there, and we can see whether they are back to work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Masaud was adding here a comment on the possible relationships at the country level between GDP and the impacts of the pandemic. So did you make any kind of analysis from the country level and specifically on the relationship between the impacts and GDP?
Not for this project, but we have another project which is currently ongoing, which is addressing the impact of the pandemic on inequalities. And one of the aspects is looking at is income inequality. And so far, I mean, this project has not yet finished. We're still analyzing it. And the literature has showed that so we expected an increase in inequality. We expected that we will find that that people, maybe not at country level, but people with lower incomes were more affected by the pandemic. So this may have increased. So those people who were already didn't have jobs, who were already had low paid jobs, were the ones who would lose it, and they have income issues. But at a global level, most of the literature showed that actually the pandemic was more equalizing, because countries with higher GDPs were often the ones who had more strict lockdowns, whereas countries with lower GDPs had bigger problems than the pandemic and COVID in general. So once you look at a global scale, there was not the expected increase in inequality or even a decrease. But now that we started analyzing the Eurostat data, the EU CIRC data, we did see an increase in inequality. And we're still investigating whether why this distinction between the literature and the EU level data. So we will look at this.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to come in. Any more questions, comments, remarks? No. So it seems we run out of questions. Eszter, thank you very much for your presentation and for sharing the data and for having a look at the differences between urban and rural areas regarding your data. I think Bianca still wants to add something else. So one last question for Bianca. Please, Bianca.
I would like to know if the data would be available.
Yes, actually the data is already available. Unfortunately, not the panel data yet, but the cross-sectional data set, the micro data set is available. So if you write us an email, then we will let you know how to access it. Its availability for now is for the first 3 waves. So not yet the current wave because it's not yet been properly checked and cleaned.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so I think we finished with very good news because we can have access to data. So again, Eszter, thank you for your clear-cut presentation, and again for bringing in some information and some comparisons between urban and rural areas. I would like to tell everyone that we will have our next webinar in June, and we will focus on the Greek case. We will have a team of Greek researchers coming in that developed an EE grants project on rural needs. So they will bring their knowledge and expertise about their own experience. And again, Eszter, thank you very much. I hope you keep updated about our action. We will certainly send you our news and deliverables. And thanks for sharing your work.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks very much.
Bye bye. Thank you.